Showtime. Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you so much, one and all, for joining us. You know, on the way into the studio tonight, I have to drive by a lake. There's mist coming up off that lake. It's downright nasty out there, and I'll tell you why. The leaves have fallen now in the north here in Sudbury. The wind's blown. It's Halloween time. We're in October. This is it, folks. It's creepy. It's dark. It's scary out there. But tonight on the way in, the sky was clear, crystal clear. You could see every star in the sky. Now, I couldn't help but wonder, what lies beyond the stars? What is in our universe? Are we the only ones that are here? Are we the only ones with intelligent life? And God, I hope not. Trust me on that one, folks. Have we been visited? And if so, why? Tonight, with our guest, Jim Moroney, we're going to look at some of those answers. We're going to look at the questions I just posed, and we're going to look at the answers, because he has a new book out called The Extraterrestrial Answer Book. Now, how great is that? All the questions you ever wanted the answers to about extraterrestrials are in this book. Easy way to get it, as always, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover. We'll take you right to a place where you can pick the book up online from the comfort of your own home. Now, home. If you're lucky enough to be indoors tonight, settle in, settle back. Put your feet up, get in your comfy chair, turn the lights down real low. Get the coffee going, because you don't want to miss this journey we're about to take together. If you're in your car, just ease up ever so slightly on that gas pedal and listen in. Tonight, we're going into the unknown with Jim Moroney and the Extraterrestrial Answer Book right now on Night Fright. Strap in and hang on. Here we go.
There is a time to question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Welcome, welcome, one and all. I'm Brent Holland. Welcome to Night Fright. Our guest tonight, Jim Moroney. Jim Moroney's on the phone live from Calgary, Alberta. He's got a great book out called The Extraterrestrial Answer Book, UFO Alien Abductions and the Coming ET Presence. I want to welcome you to the show for the very first time, Jim. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Brent. I'm excited to be on here.
Glad to have you, and it's so nice to be talking with a fellow Canadian. So often, well, it's so often, as you know, this type of content, there are a plethora of Canadian authors like yourself, plethora of Canadian filmmakers, plethora of Canadian content makers of this genre that just get glossed over for some reason here in our home country. You know, George Norrie's been on the show before, of course, from Coast to Coast, and he does a wonderful, wonderful job of getting this information out there to folks. But primarily, most of his guests, as you know, and rightfully so, are from the States. Although I know you have been a guest on his show yourself. What this show, Night Fright, tries to do is bring Canadians onto this show and give them the forum to talk about their work. And I think it's an essential part of our Canadian mosaic to get this information out there. So let's dive in right away, shall we, folks? Folks, our guest tonight, Jim Moroney, The Extraterrestrial Answer Book, UFO Aliens, Abductions, and the Coming ET Presence. And that's where I want to begin, the Coming ET Presence. What do you see in our future, Jim?
Well, what I see in our future is certainly the extraterrestrials that are currently here visiting us. We'll call it that. It's more of an intervention than it's...
Can I interrupt you right there? They're currently
Absolutely.
here already?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's go there.
There's no doubt in my mind, and that's because it's not so much what I've read, because there is a ton of material on this stuff. Most of it's actually not very accurate, unfortunately, but there is a ton of material on this stuff, at least supporting the hypothesis that the phenomenon is actually real. The bigger question that is rolling around in everybody's mind, I think, is exactly what are they doing, why are they here? Back in 1987, I actually had an encounter experience which completely changed my view on the subject of extraterrestrials and UFOs, obviously. And that encounter experience occurred actually in Winnipeg. It actually occurred in Canada. And it was really difficult for me, I think, to kind of get my head around the experience itself and what it meant in a just not just from a personal point of view, obviously, and then things that I have to deal with on a personal level, but really what's happening on a global sense. And why I decided to write the book was not really about me in any sense, but really to reflect about what this means for all of us.
Fair enough. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for you and our children, the future generations of Canada and the globe, as you just said?
Yeah. Well, what's happening right now, what we're dealing with is a phenomenon that can best be described and understood in the sense of an intervention. You know, the whole idea of contact has to be completely dismissed. You know, you just throw that out the window. Don't even worry about that. You know, what we need to really consider is that we're dealing with an intervention, and interventions themselves even though there's a sense of compassion and love to it, there's always a sense of force to it. And this is really essentially what we're dealing with right now. What these beings are trying to do, we don't fully understand it, even after the many years that I've spent researching the subject and even from my own experiences. We don't have a complete understanding of it, but it seems to me, and it seems that the evidence is clearly pointing that what we're dealing with is some kind of a relationship that's going to unfold here in the next few years, certainly within my lifetime. But the extent of that relationship and how that relationship is going to evolve, it probably might take more than one generation to actually occur. But they're here because they perceive that there's a crisis or a turning point in human evolutionary development, I'll call it, for lack of a better term. And without some kind of intervention, they feel that we probably wouldn't be able to make it over the next 20 or 30 years.
You know, you say relationships. Do you think that perhaps, going back to Zecharia Sitchin's thesis, and folks, Zecharia Sitchin is a researcher who believes that we are indeed the offspring, if you will, or the genetic manipulations of extraterrestrials. Do you believe in that theory as well? Perhaps they are our parents, so to speak?
No, Brent, I don't really subscribe to that particular theory. Really, traditionally, my background's actually been fairly conservative, even though in my studies and stuff like that, and yet I have a viewpoint I would consider to be somewhat different than that's traditionally, broadcasted on the whole UFO area and the UFO phenomenon. But I really subscribe to the idea that these beings are certainly they consider themselves not separate from us in that sense. It's not a biological thing, but they consider ourselves as, I guess, co-creators or of the universe in some way. And in other words, there's some kind of link that they actually feel that they have with us, but I don't think it's biological.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Okay, folks, if you're just joining us, we're speaking with Jim Moroney tonight. Forgive me for that. The Extraterrestrial Answer Book is his book. He's the author of UFOs, Alien Abductions, and the Coming ET Presence, www.nightfrightshow.com. As always, click on that book cover. We'll take you right to a place where you can order it online. You know, I've got a plethora of questions for you now, Jim, if you don't mind.
Not at all. I can imagine. I kind of opened up a can of worms there, didn't I?
Sure did. And, as you say, your book's called The Answer Book, The Extraterrestrial Answer Book. Stan Friedman, folks, was on the show several weeks ago, and, of course, he's the father of Roswell, also a Canadian. So there's a triple Canadian connection there. Fabulous show. He was talking about Roswell, and of course, Canada has its own Roswell and Shag Harbor. He said there was three things that brought the aliens to come and visit us, so to speak, and it all ties in again to 1947. What was happening in New Mexico at the time was nuclear weapons. We were working on missiles to get into outer space, and of course, our mindset is very aggressive, very warlike mindset. Do you agree with that?
Completely, 100%. I mean, Stanton and I are definitely on the same page in that way. And you know, when you consider Canada itself, there's so many great people in Canada for the size of the country that we have that have contributed an immense amount of information and understanding on the UFO phenomena, actually quite out of proportion to the size of our nation. And Stanton certainly has been one of those really stout figures with respect to his analysis and his criteria that he's used to establish to assess what's happening in the phenomenon. So I completely agree that these beings are here because of the 1947 and the discovery of nuclear weapons. Even just recently, in fact, in the news, there was the press club out of New York, and they had quite a number of leading military people coming forward, swearing affidavits, legal affidavits, swearing affidavits that UFOs were in fact tampering with their nuclear arsenals and their nuclear weapon systems. So you can see it doesn't take really a rocket scientist in that sense to have a real good understanding about what's actually happening with the phenomenon from what we understand.
In your book, Jim, were you able to ascertain where the hot spots are in Canada? Is there more activity, say, in Calgary, Alberta, as opposed to where I am in Sudbury, or perhaps where Stanton is in New Brunswick?
Yeah, it seems to me, honestly, that the reporting systems that we have are not, frankly, all that sophisticated. So we really have a loose-knit organization, even though it's relatively well-run compared to other countries, that collates this information and reports on UFO sightings. So to make a long story short, we only really record about 10% of all UFO sightings. And we know this because we've done a number of scientific surveys and research about where people report sightings to, and even if they report them at all. And it's quite astounding, actually, I think, to know that we're only dealing with a small percentage of the actual report or sightings that people actually see. Now, given that, what we have found is that typically when the skies are clear, like the evening that you were referring to tonight in your area, you actually, and it's warm out, we tend to see some increases, and I think that's because typically the people are just outside more often, But again, when the skies are clear and people are outside walking around, it's a tendency that we do see these reports coming in. But I must say, it's not just nighttime. Also, we do have really good video footage, actually, of some daytime images.
I'd like to go back now, if you don't mind, Jim, and I'm just going to tell folks who we're speaking with. Folks, if you're just joining us tonight, settle in, relax, because we've just begun a journey tonight that I think you're going to enjoy for the next hour or so. We're talking with Jim Moroney. He's on the phone live from Calgary, Alberta. He's got a new book out called The Extraterrestrial Answer Book, UFO, Alien Abductions, and the Coming ET Presence. And I'm going to go back to the ET presence later on in the show as well, just to let you know. Easy way to get it, as always, www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover and you can order it right online. But I want to go back to your own experience right now, Jim, the one you had in 1987. Were you a believer or non-believer, a skeptic, before the encounter?
I believed that life existed in the universe, and I remember hearing a story about Betty and Barney Hill. It just seemed to be an interesting story, but I didn't give it much thought. I thought, okay, maybe there's extraterrestrials out there, maybe some UFO reports that I heard sounded maybe there was something to it, but I thought, the universe is so large, what do we really know? So I put it on the back burner. I wasn't like an avid believer or anything like that. I just said, well, maybe they're real, maybe they're not. And I really thought that if they were real, that they would be pretty much like us. That's my assumption that I'd made at the time. You know, they're just probably just interested in what we were doing if they were here, but they would be pretty much like us. That's what I had assumed.
Now, when it actually did appear to you, what were your feelings? Was there feelings of terror, of, I guess, inquisitiveness?
Well, at first, I can tell you right at the I went through the whole range of emotions, from absolute, utter terror to elation and friendship and love. And but at first, it was absolutely terrorizing. I mean, I've never experienced anything like that. I didn't think it could have been possible. I wasn't really sure if I was going to even survive it, to be quite frank with you, because it was such a strange experience. You know, I didn't know who they were. I didn't know what they wanted. You know, it was a completely, obviously, I hate the term, but alien environment that I suddenly found myself within. So all the rules of, you know, that you would normally be familiar with are gone. You know, I wasn't sure. You know, it was so desperate for me that I really just tried not to do anything stupid to put my life in jeopardy. That's honestly how serious the situation was. And when the memories from that particular experience, because what had actually happened, I mean, they had actually abducted me from this truck stop, which I was actually trying to get some sleep in, if you can imagine. I was actually driving from Edmonton, Alberta at the time, to Sarnia, Ontario, and I'd stopped in at Winnipeg to grab a little bit of sleep at one of the truck stops. But later on, what I've come to understand is that this was a very sophisticated process. It wasn't by accident that they selected me, in a sense. They understood what the surroundings were. They evaluated it. They made sure that, for the most part, I'd be the only person that would recall this particular experience. And they were very, very careful about, you know, how this whole thing unfolded. And even the memories, the direct memories that I had, they were very careful in what memories they selected for me to remember. And I did have to go through hypnotic regression to recount some of the other memories. But the whole experience itself, I would only estimate that it probably was around 2 hours. But it may have been a little bit less than that. So, you know, I wasn't gone for days or anything like that, but I would estimate around 2 hours.
Stick around, folks. This is a fascinating journey tonight from one of Canada's own. Jim Moroney's on the phone, long distance, live from Calgary, Alberta. We're talking about his book, The Extraterrestrial Answer Book. Right now we're talking about his own personal experience. And I'm going to ask Jim, were they the typical Greys?
Well, I don't know if there's anything typical about these things. Frankly,
good answer. Yeah, just the buddies down the road we play ball hockey with. Oh, God. They were beings that had blue pupils. They had essentially I call it the physical attributes of these Greys that are typically described. That'd be the easiest way to describe them. But their pupils were actually blue, and the same blue pupils in all the beings that I saw. So there wasn't any color variation between them. They had no ears, only small protrusions for nose, and a small, slender mouth would probably be the way to describe it. It's kind of almost pointy chins, really. And the necks were extraordinarily small given the weight of the head that was actually on them. I mean, it's not really described that well, I think, in movies or anything like that, but I'll tell you, when I was walking behind one of these beings, I was just amazed that this being could support the size of the head given the size of the neck. The neck was only a few inches in diameter. I was just astounded by, you know, the biology of the creature. I'll call it the creature that was in front of me. The beings themselves also wore I'll call them different uniforms, for lack of a better description on it. Some had kind of like white lab coats. Others had somewhat jumpsuits with some kind of uniforms. Most of them were beige-colored with the uniforms, white for the lab coats. And there's two other beings that I saw that were just wearing I'll describe them as kind of like black jumpsuits. And they were very, very large. I mean, the two beings with the black jumpsuits were somewhere in the neighborhood of 9.5 feet tall. Oh my God!
Yeah. So, I think that however they reproduce, I'm not sure it's from a mammalian kind of reproductive system. It might be more akin to, insect eggs or something like this. I don't know. Obviously, I'm just hypothesizing. I don't understand. I don't really know that. But they seem to have their classifications and their work tasks essentially quite well laid out, and it's even associated with size. So to me, it means that the colony or the society in which they exist, if they need worker bees kind of thing, they'll be able to produce types of configurations. So they're obviously an extremely highly adaptable species. Those are some things I can determine. Because, they were interacting with me, and I had no problem breathing. So they've obviously adjusted to our atmospheric conditions, which is still amazing to me that they could come from wherever they came from and still be able to breathe our air. So I think they've obviously taken time to adjust to our atmosphere.
How did they communicate with you? Was it through telepathy?
Strangely enough, they actually spoke English, even though I know this whole story sounds outrageous, but I can only tell it the way it actually happened. They did speak English to me, but they didn't speak English to each other. And when they spoke English to me, it was very short words, very short sentences, not more than 3 or 4 words at a time. When they looked at each other, I believe they communicated telepathically. They didn't have a need to, speak English to each other. Obviously, they had maybe their own language, or I didn't hear them speak to each other.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Here in Canada, I was going to say they better not show up in Quebec if they only speak English. Okay, I'll let that one slide as an ex-Montrealer. The Extraterrestrial Answer Book. Jim Moroney's our guest tonight. He's on the phone from Calgary. And I'm not making light of your experience. Trust me on that. I just wanted to take a shot. I just wanted to take a shot at Quebec. One of the reasons why I'm in Sudbury is because of that racism stuff. So, okay, that's not the focus of the show. I'll move on. We talked about communication. Did they explain to you somehow what precisely it was they wanted from you? Or perhaps from us?
Yeah, essentially, in the end, when I had time to assess what had actually happened to me, it became apparent that the whole structure from the abduction process and everything else was actually done in a way and planned out in every single detail to try and evaluate the kind of person that I was, how I would respond to stressful situations, they were assessing essentially my whole psychological makeup, essentially. And when there was a time, as I was just coming to, I'd actually passed out because there was some medical procedure they were doing on me, and the pain was so intense, I just passed out. So as I was coming to, being approached on the side of the bed on my right-hand side, and this is where the two large beings, the two really tall beings were at the edge of the bed. I believe they were kind of guards or something like this. I think they were concerned that I might hurt somebody there or something. But you're restrained for the most part anyway. But this other being who was about, I would say, 5'2", 5'3", approached on the right-hand side of my bed, and she asked a question. She just, her question was, we don't understand your anger. And it was a really unusual question because I was still just recovering from consciousness. And I'm obviously thinking, well, I'm not angry now. And I'm still trying to get a handle on where I still am. Mm-hmm. And she repeated the question again, and there wasn't any sense of emotion. It was as if there was a mannequin speaking. And I got confused about it again. I thought, what is she talking about? And then I thought, oh, yeah, when they got me on board the first time, I was sure swearing and yelling at them, demanding, being self-righteous, saying, you have no right to do this to me. What do you guys think you're doing? You're not supposed to be doing this. Who gives you the right? Being quite indignant. It was all because I was scared for my life, actually. And I recalled that after I calmed down, I realized that, I'd better start to try and figure out who they are and what they want and not be so aggressive towards them. Otherwise, I might do something might end up being stupid. I might hurt myself or they might do something to me. And So I responded to her that, well, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure out which, I wasn't expecting it to hurt, and that's really what I wanted to say. But all I got out was, I'm sorry. And then this mannequin, this voice and everything else suddenly just evaporated, and this tremendous emotion came from her, and this tremendous sense of compassion and love. And, I couldn't help but break down and start crying. And I grabbed her, and she held me, and she told me it's okay to cry. The strong ones cry. And that gives you some idea of the poignancy of the typical experience, from, I think, what some abductees are going through even today.
I picked up something that you just said the past 2 or 3 minutes. You described the being as she.
Yeah.
Did she have breasts or something,
No.
kind of female genitals at all, or?
No, it's really unusual. She looked identical to everyone else, but there was, all I can say is there was a feminine aura or quality about her. I can't really describe it other than that. Even though she had, her physical attributes were completely alien. There was no, no indication that she was female from anything else other than the sense that she was female.
Were you alone in the craft, cold, any smells that come to mind, or lying down on bed, perhaps?
The story even gets somewhat even more bizarre. If you can, it's been years and years and years, and I can still recall this with absolute clarity, but there was a room that they walked me into, and it was the size of a gymnasium. And I was astounded, by the size of this thing. At no time did I ever sense the craft was in motion. I don't know where I was. I never saw. I wasn't able to see out a window or anything. And when I looked around in this gymnasium-sized room, I had noticed that there was probably about 70 or so beds in the room, and there was probably about 30 other people, maybe 35 other people in there, and they all appeared to be sleeping. One had a flannel nightgown. Another person seemed to be. Could have been a trucker, or could have been a lumberjack. There was people in all various codes of dress and everything else, and that really shocked me. That really disturbed me, worse than I think anything else that had actually happened to me, because there's a sense of helplessness of where I was, and what they were doing was so beyond what I thought was even possible. How could this be happening to so many people and us not know about it? What were the chances of me getting out of here? All of those things suddenly rushed at me. And, so you'd find yourself in a very odd situation where you'd think that seeing another human being would be something that would be comforting. And when I saw the other human beings there, it was anything but comforting. It was more disturbing than anything else.
Labyrinth. Were you made to feel less than human, like you were just indeed a lab rat, or perhaps just a piece of meat?
At the very beginning, they were very, I'll call it task-orientated. That might be a good way. I use that term in my profession as well. And but when we start looking at what they were doing, they were very disciplined, very, very disciplined. They were very focused on what they needed to do. There wasn't a lot of I'll take time to understand you or listen to you. It's like, no, we got business to do here. This is what we're doing. Done. It's just, they're very exacting on this very, and they would give you suggestions that you would just follow automatically, or I did. And obviously I believe that there was some kind of hypnotic suggestion going on. So they did have some influence over me when they were, wandering around. They didn't have to put me in shackles or anything like that. I just somehow just complied because it seemed like the right thing to do. And the experience with them towards the end, when I was leaving the ship, there was a real sense of sadness, a sense of joyous. Like they were actually, it felt like they were my best friends, quite frankly.
Interesting.
It's unusual. Yeah, it was once they did what they needed to do, once they assessed who I was, once they got a better understanding about what I am and what makes Jim tick. I would say they dropped this bravado that they had actually showed me earlier, and they became very compassionate and they very concerned, and they said, look, we're here to try and help you, and by that's just not me, it's about all of us. And that's the sense. It's an unusual way of saying it. It was more of a feeling that came from them. When I left them, I said, look, I know I have to go. I can't stay there. And it's almost odd that there was almost a sense that it would have been nice to stay with such great beings, but it was like, no, I have to go back. I've got things to do, obviously, and my place isn't here. So
you're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Wow. What a story tonight, folks. Jim Moroney's our guest tonight. If you're like me, you're glued to the edge of your seat because this is a true story from a true Canadian. Calgary, Alberta, folks, not that far away. Lots of mysteries in the world, folks. Lots of mysteries right here in Canada. His book is called The Extraterrestrial Answer Book, UFO Alien Abductions, which he's just described his own, and The Coming ET Presence. Easy way to get it, as always, www.nightfrightshow.com. Nightfrightshow.com. Just click on that book cover. We'll take you right to a place where you can order it from the comfort of your own home. I'm your host, Brent Holland, and you are indeed listening to Night Fright. When you're at the Night Fright Show website, there's a wealth of information there, and I want to tell you there's something new we're offering as well, and it's just an extension of the radio show. As you know, this show is broadcast across the university network. I think we're into 80 stations at this point from coast to coast to coast, 3 coasts, of course, in Canada, and on the internet as well. So you can download all those archival shows for free right to your iPods. There's no charge for any of that. On top of that, we have something new out called Night Fright TV, where I'm taping this show as I wave at the camera right now, and I stick it up on something called Daily Motion. And just go there and watch the show. There's a visual to the show. It is not TV per se. It's not a television show. It's just a videotaped show of this conversation and the radio show. Also, over my shoulder, you're going to be looking at right now is a copy of the book, The Answer Book, The Extraterrestrial Answer Book. Some photos of Jim as well will be cycling through. So there is some graphic stuff to look at as well. So check that out as well. Again, all those shows are free for you to download. Just to let you know, coming up in November, just a couple of weeks away, as always, we'll be going back to the JFK assassination. And nobody does that assassination, and all the researchers like Night Fright. That's something I'm very proud of because nobody else covers it. We've had first-person witnesses on. Dr. Robert McClellan was on. He's the guy that worked on JFK 3 minutes after he was shot at Parkland Hospital. Beverly Oliver was on, the Babushka Lady. You can see her very clearly in this film, which is that film, that very famous film I'm sure you've seen. If you've seen one film of the assassination, it's probably the Zapruder film. It's predominant in the movie JFK, Back and to the Left. We've also had Jim Diogenio on, and he was a consultant for the film JFK. Now, coming up the first week of November, I almost said January, I'm getting ahead of myself, we've got Robert Groden coming on, along with Rick Nelson. Rick Nelson was instrumental in Dallas. He's a Canadian also. He just lives here not too far from Sudbury, and it was a complete accident I ran into him. He spent a year boarding with Lee Harvey Oswald's wife, Marina Oswald. He has become the de facto expert next to Marina on Lee Harvey Oswald, and the stories he has to tell about Lee Harvey Oswald are fascinating. He'll be here along with Robert Groden, who again, I should mention, was a consultant for Oliver Stone's JFK. So I'm really looking forward to that. We've got some other great guests lined up. Larry Hancock will be back talking about his latest research on the assassination. Abraham Bolden, of course, is in archives, first African-American Secret Service agent handpicked by JFK, was a whistleblower after the assassination, folks, was subsequently framed for a crime he did not commit and thrown in jail. There's actual talk that Mr. Bolden's story will now be made into a feature film. Will Smith will be starring him, so that's very exciting for Mr. Bolden after trying to clear his name all these years later. A whole wealth of shows on Bigfoot, shows on witches. We had a live, so he claims, listen to the show, decide for yourself, a live vampire come on the show and told us his story. Decide for yourself if you want to believe that. That's fine. No problems there whatsoever. All those shows are free for you to download. No problems whatsoever. www.nightfrightshow.com. Our guest tonight, Jim Moroney. We're talking about the Extraterrestrial Answer Book, UFOs, Alien Abductions, and the Coming ET Presence. Jim has just related to us his story of abduction. He was abducted, taken on board a ship. He panicked, and the extraterrestrials calmed him down. He had seen other people on board the ship. I'm going to bring it right now to the point where we left off, and I'm going to ask Jim, when did they release you, Jim?
Well, they released me back into my vehicle, and it was back to the same location in the parking lot that they'd actually extracted me from. Another interesting component to this was that when they extracted me from this parking lot, they actually took my vehicle with me. That, I know it sounds absolutely outrageous, but I found myself essentially inside this amphitheater, standing beside my car with 4 or 5 distinctly non-human beings looking at me.
But I don't think it is strange, because if a police officer or someone was to happen along and find the vehicle unoccupied, right?
That's exactly where I think they actually took the vehicle. They realized that, hey, you know what, it's easier for us. We have the technology to do it. We'll just take the vehicle out. We don't want to cause a big stir at this point, so we're just going to do it this way. That's exactly what, and they have the ability to do that.
You're saying an amphitheater. Was there many people in? I picture automatically a medical. Somebody lying at the bottom. Is it similar to that?
The whole craft was really clean. I mean, it was extraordinarily clean. And the amphitheater, I would only describe it as a step. So I was at the lower level, and there were steps that led up. The steps themselves were somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 feet deep and only about 5 inches or so high. And they were all lit underneath and by indirect lighting. So it was well lit inside. I would say typical, office lighting, essentially at lighting levels. Which to me, there's so many things that were extraordinary about the experience, but it was, it's a large, the room itself was probably 30, 40 feet across. It was hard to estimate, actually.
Understood. So they released you with your car back to where you were. Were you cognizant that you were gone at that point? Because you had mentioned before we took the little 5-minute break that you went through self-hypnotic regression or hypnotic regression.
I actually went through a guided regression. So if you're going to go through any type of hypnotic regression, you have to go to a professional that's going to be able to take you through that process. I'd never done that before in my life, so it was something that when I did go to get my hypnotic regression, I really took time to try and find the most highly credible person to do it. And to be honest with you, money was no object. I just wanted to make sure that this was going to be legitimate. It was going to be done safely. It was going to be done professionally. And so part of the experiences that I was recounting to you, part of them were recovered through hypnosis, and the other parts were not. So it's kind of difficult to kind of separate all of them. But, it became very distinctive to me that I remember with absolute clarity and full waking state consciousness the beginning of the abduction, and then finding myself in the car as the craft was moving away.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Once you became cognizant, like now I know your story and you don't seem to have any doing that, were you nervous about telling people some of the memories you were experiencing and things like that?
Man, if you're going to jump around and start telling people immediately, I think you're probably a little bit unstable because that might put it mildly. I mean, like, who's going to believe you? First of all, I realized very quickly. I said, I'm not going to tell any. I'm not going to tell it. Like, who? I was going to call the police and tell them something? Forget it. You know, I didn't know even who to report it to be honest with you. And then I decided. I just got back in my car after I went in for a little bit. I washed up, cleaned up a little bit. Checked with anybody if they'd seen something in the parking lot. I didn't tell them what. And when I got a response from the waitress that was there that she hadn't seen anything, I just got back in my car and I got the hell out of there. You know, I had no intentions of staying there any longer than I absolutely had to. And that was one kind of weird drive, I'll tell you, that on Highway 1. I kept looking up in the sky as I drove the rest of the night, and I didn't get to sleep until 7 a.m. in the morning. But back to your question.
Yes.
I didn't tell anybody for years and years and years. And I did tell my wife. We've been married now going on 19 years. And I did tell her when I was going to marry her. And the reason is because, you know, when you love somebody dearly and you have something in your life, you don't fully understand the implications of it. You know that you're putting them in a situation that might put them at risk. And these are the things that you have to wrestle with. And I decided, look, I got to tell her this. I tell her that I don't understand it entirely, but this is what happened to me. This is what I do understand about part of the phenomenon. And, you know, she was really accepting of it. I think maybe she obviously loved me a lot to say, Jim, you know what? And she knew me well enough to say that, look, you know, I know you're not making this up, and I don't fully understand it, but I love you, and I it's not a concern for me. And I said, okay, great. And when we had our kids, we decided that we were not going to tell the kids until they got older. And you know, the kids have enough to deal with these days than things like this. So we made a very conscious decision not to tell them until we thought they were actually ready to hear about it. And so we told them when they were 18, 19. And that was, you know, by that time it was an easy story in that sense to tell them. But I'm glad we waited to tell them. You know,
we've had many on the show before, and in most cases they say that it's generation. Parents, and so on. In your case, do you fear for your children that they may be in?
No, not at all.
Thank God.
What I understand what's happening is that these beings are essentially evaluating individuals, all of us. If they have an opportunity to do it, they'll evaluate every single person that they can. It's just that we don't have conscious recollection or memories of all these particular encounters. Not all of us do. And the memories that we do recount is usually very selective, and they're not by accident. So, by the vast majority, that's what's happening. So I don't believe it follows family lines. I don't think we're going to follow those types of things. I think it can happen to absolutely anybody, regardless of race, color, creed, education. These are non-factors essentially. I think these beings are searching for individuals that they feel that they might be able to have some kind of a better relationship with. I think that's a very loose way of describing it, because obviously the phenomenon itself is still unfolding, and there's still a number of mysteries that we still don't have a full understanding of.
Folks, our guest tonight, Jim Moroney, live from Calgary, Alberta, and his book is called The Extraterrestrial Answer Book. He's telling us about his own alien abduction right now, and it's a fascinating story if you're just joining us. He was abducted in 1987 at a truck stop in Winnipeg, and he was taken on board the ship. He was evaluated, as he calls it, and then placed back down. Jim, have you been abducted since?
I believe I have. They've shown up. They've come. It hasn't been as dramatic as the very first experience, but they have. They've come in. But I'd say maybe I really remember maybe 4 times in my life since that period of time, since 1987. But I've accepted the reality that I've likely had other experiences that I'll never have any conscious recollection for, and I don't have a desire to actually go through any hypnotic regression again to recount those experiences. I've kind of put myself in the trust of these beings. I don't think it's reckless. I think it's more responsible on my part to say that, you know what, if you guys don't think I can handle it, then I don't really want to know it. I got enough things in life to worry about, like anybody else,
right, than
having to deal with things that are so dramatically challenging that they would impede your ability to function on a daily basis. So I've kind of decided, you know what, when these beings want me to know something, they'll certainly let me know. What's interesting is that one brief encounter, and it was only just a few seconds of it, occurred the night before 9/11, and I was in Edmonton actually at the time, and I could. It's very difficult to describe, but I could certainly feel their presence in the room and just outside. I know it sounds really unusual and odd, but that's the best way I could describe it. I just thought it wasn't by accident that, you know, I felt their presence at that point in time.
Many people, strange things happen just prior to 9/11. Isn't that funny? Eh? And here's another one right there, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, folks. We're speaking with Jim Moroney tonight, the Extraterrestrial Answer book. He's the author of. Easy way to get it, www.nightfrightshow.com, nightfrightshow.com. Click on the book cover, as always, associated with Jim's. You'll see his name there, very well displayed, and a little I was going to say biopsy, isn't that funny? A little no pun intended. No
pun intended on that one. That's a good one, though. I should have put that one in there.
Get the book, folks. It's well worth it.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland.
How has it changed your perspective? It had to have. I mean, something this fundamentally earth-shattering had to have changed your perspective of things. Perhaps life after death? I don't know.
Yeah, it changes a lot in your life. For me, it does. You know, it also, I think the biggest challenge for me was to continue to remain grounded, continue with my career in health and safety. You know, I have responsibilities like everybody else does. You know, I've learned that the daily responsibilities, which we might consider mundane, are still really, really important. I also have a better sense now that maybe the problems of the world that are here are, in some way, I own those, that we're not as separate from each other as we think we are, and that these beings, it's not so much, even though we're going to have a relationship with them in the future, I believe their overriding concern for us is to have a better relationship with each other, and ultimately that's why they're here at this point in time.
If the roles were reversed, Jim, and somehow you were able to abduct one of the creatures that abducted you, would you treat them essentially the same way? How would you conduct that interview with them, if you will?
Oh, that's a really good question. There are some similarities between us and these beings. I mean, they do have a sense of humor. I have a sense of that. They do have emotions, but their emotions are much more highly developed than ours. They're just, it's hard to describe unless you actually are in the presence of these beings. Yet, I'm not sure that I'd ever find myself with the knowledge and the understanding and everything else to put myself in a situation to kind of abduct one of these beings and question them. The abduction process itself is very, very unusual. And it's one of the things that so many scientists have been stumbling over. I mean, this is one of the biggest, I'm not going to say it's the biggest challenge in facing humanity. Obviously, I'm not going to be so conceited to say something like that, because there's a lot of challenges facing us. But it's certainly one of the greater questions that we have, and it's something that's going to definitely unfold within our lifetime. I have 100% belief in that. And for that reason, it's the reason why I wrote the book, and it's also one of the reasons why I think the best thing that we could do for ourselves individually is try and educate ourselves to what's happening, and encourage those people who are researching this phenomenon in incredible ways to continue that kind of research. I mean, very quickly right now, the skeptics are becoming much, much quieter as the roar of general people is being heard with respect to understanding that the phenomenon is real and demanding more accurate and reliable information about the subject. So I'm really pushing towards that idea too as well. Is that We have to be very responsible about what we're going to be doing in this area. I believe it'll be some sort of a crisis that's going to occur. Even if we announce that the UFO phenomena is real, it's not going to be the end of the issues. It's really going to be the beginning, because socially we're going to have to decide how are we going to respond to this type of interaction that they've chosen. I don't believe I don't believe they're going to governments and having conversations with governments. It's just they seem to be far more interested in individuals at this point in time, regardless of where you live or who what race you're from or what government you're with.
You must be clairvoyant, Jim, because my next question for you was concerning MJ-12, and that's Majestic 12 I'm talking about, folks. And those are reputed to be stolen documents that show, I guess, basically that what happened in Roswell in 1947 was true. And these are documents, apparently, that are handed from president to president.
Oh, and your question is, sorry?
Oh, I was going to ask you, do you feel people with global government's permission, or perhaps there's nothing you can darn well do about it anyways?
Yeah, I think that these beings, the way they've chosen to interact with us is so divergent from the way our governmental systems have been structured. I mean, I've worked in provincial and municipal governments for years, and it's become quite evident to me that, other than dealing with wildfires or floods or tornadoes or hurricanes or even pandemics, which are quite a challenge for governments to deal with, this situation is unfolding in a way that we don't have systems in place to deal with it. Okay. They don't respect borders. They don't respect visas. It's not like we're going to be at an airport and having an alien go through a search, in front of us. So they don't respect these rules that we've put in place for ourselves. They don't respect the borders themselves. And that also has to be really considered very carefully when we think and we want to think about how they view the universe and how they view our world. I think they might even see some of these rules as being quite silly, and thinking that it kind of is constructed in a way to separate each individuals from others is probably not a really good thing in their mind. So I don't see governments really engaging these extraterrestrials on a one-on-one basis. I see them looking at it from a more social context and saying, well, okay, what kind of systems should be put in place right now to deal with the reality of the phenomenon, and how much information should we relay to the public? And that goes on to, can we even trust the governments now at this point? It's certainly going to be a real challenge for them. They are going to have to deal with it, but just how they're going to deal with it is the million-dollar question. Yes. And I certainly want to be in that position to be able to try and coax them into creating policies that actually make sense and encourage a more open discussion regarding the phenomena.
You're listening to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio. The time is now. And now your host, Brent Holland. www.frightshow.com, folks. There you're going to find our guest tonight book. It's called The Extraterrestrial Answer Book. Our guest tonight, Jim Moroney, is the author. Click on the book cover. We'll take you right to a place where you can get it online. Looks like we're going to have to start winding it down in just a couple of minutes. A couple more questions. When you were on board, abducted on that ship, was there an exchange of ideas between you and the being? Was there a dialogue going on, or was it more they were feeding you information?
Well, this is really interesting, really a fascinating question, because I never had that actually happen on board, but I did have an experience with them a few years later. And what they were able to do is not, if you want to tell somebody something, the best way to do it is show them, rather than tell them in any kind of language. And so what they were able to do is link with my mind, my consciousness, and show me what they were seeing. And if they had a scene or they were experiencing something in the future that they could see with clarity, they would simply just take me there. So 1 minute I'm in bed, lying there, sleeping. I wake up, a being's in my room. They take a sudden movement towards me. The next minute I'm standing with a friend I can't really see them, but they're on to my left-hand side, and I'm observing something, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm actually seeing this. I could smell everything, I can hear the noises, I can hear the sounds, and it was very, very profound. And then the next instant, boom, they're gone, and I'm back in my room. And so what they're able to do then is to link with a human being's consciousness and just show them what's happening either in the future, or they'll give them a scenario of something, like in myself, it's happened to other abductees as well. And that's the best way to learn. It goes beyond words. There's no words that really need to be said. They just show you something, and you experience it, and that's how you learn.
What did they show you in that moment?
They showed me a little bit about our future. To me, I don't know if this is going to come true at all. Maybe it was just a learning process, but these beings have the ability to perceive the future. So I was suddenly with this being, seeing this thing unfold in the future, and all I could describe it was that there's a lot of fear and confusion going on. That's the sense of what was happening. There was a lot of darkness. The skies themselves were dark. This is on Earth, and these beings were here trying to help. Essentially, they were taking some people away, and it seemed to me that there was an impending catastrophe, or there was a catastrophe that was ongoing at the time. And the feeling itself was a feeling of grimness. It wasn't a feeling of joy to be rescued or anything. The whole thing was grim. The situation was grim. It's the best way I could describe it. And what I learned from that was really a resolution of the importance of what I believe I have to do in my life. Life has been very good to me to this point in time, and I have to do something to try and give back to society in a way that I feel is going to be constructive. And it really left me with a sense of and a desire to do something of importance. And I believe that that's my calling at this point in time in my life, as I'm winding down in my career, to do something that's going to make a difference.
Self-fulfilled prophecy right now. Folks, our guest tonight has been Jim Moroney. His book is called The Extraterrestrial Answer Book. Yeah, lots of answers there, folks. UFOs, alien abductions, and the coming ET presence. He's joined us tonight live on the telephone all the way from Calgary, Alberta. I want to thank you so much. I have truly, truly enjoyed this conversation. I want to invite you back in the future as well.
I'd love to. There's a million stories to happen and lots of things going on. So anytime, Brent, I'd love to. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Most enjoyed it, my friend. All the very best to you and you.
You too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye now. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Zazaluk. See you next time.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy radio.